Everybody. I just returned from the top of the Pryor Mountains, or almost the top of the Pryor Mountains in northern Wyoming on the Montana border. And I've been filming Cloud's son as we continue the Cloud saga. And for you all, I think it might be of interest why it's important to understand wild horses. If you understand wild horses, then you can better understand your own horse. When I started, I was assigned the job to document wild horses for Marty Stouffer's Wild America series. And I thought I knew something about horses. I had horses as a child. I had a beautiful Palomino quarter horse who was all by himself. And so this one horse at a time, I didn't even have the knowledge that you all probably have of having a group of horses together. I'd only had one horse at a time. So I'm bumping up this four-wheel drive road and this stallion comes racing across this wilderness road in front of me and gets into it with another stallion. They're rearing and screaming, and then the black stallion runs to another group of horses and they run away. And that was Raven. He was a black stallion that lived on the Pryor Mountains. He was Cloud's father. Cloud hadn't been born yet, but I thought, wow, horses are interesting. See, I thought they didn't do anything interesting at all. And boy, was I in for a surprise. Because I realized that they live in these social units. There's a stallion, usually only one stallion. Occasionally you have a satellite stallion, but usually one stallion. And in the Pryor Mountains, at least 3 or 4 mares usually satisfies a stallion. And among those mares, you have a pecking order, and you may have a lead mare who leads the band to water or what happens when there's a storm. And that lead mare, in the case of Cloud, was a very, very strong mare. Well, I had filmed the band for a year in the Pryor Mountains. And the next spring, I took a friend of mine from California who wasn't really a horse person at all, but was fascinated about what I was telling her. And we were on the Pryor Mountains at the very end of May. And we hiked down because there was a stallion whose son was trying to steal and breed one of his mares while the stallion father was away. And I thought, this is fascinating. Wow, look at this. And then the father came back and of course disciplined the son, and the son ended up being kicked out. And that's what happens to young stallions. They're generally at the age of 2, they're kicked out by their fathers. So anyway, I'm filming this and just, enraptured in what I'm doing. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of light. And they were coming through the trees. The light was moving through the trees, this light color. And so I panned the camera around, and I had a torpedo of a lens, way too much lens if you're photographers, way too long a lens to get any width of shot. Panned it around, and here came this Palomino mare who was Raven's mare. And following her was a tottering newborn foal, and I mean tottering. And he stuck to her like glue. They passed right in front of my camera, and little did I know it, but my life had changed. And all I wanted to do was to follow the life of this one wild horse, because I was learning so much that I was just like a sponge, soaking it in. And the horses were they were wild. Why the Palomino walked right past my camera, I'll never know. But in the subsequent time that I spent there, I learned how to be conspicuously benign. When you hide, and you know this with your horses, they're surprised if you kind of walk around the corner and all of a sudden you're there. So if you can let them know you're coming, and they're prepared for your presence, then they aren't freaked out by being surprised. So I made myself a parent. And I sat on a trail, one of the many trails on the Pryor Mountains. And in time, the same black stallion Raven, who was Cloud's father, came and he would walk down the trail fairly near to me, and I would be able to photograph them. And because Raven, among the other bands on the mountain, the other family groups, he was a pretty strong stallion. And so I think, horses watch each other and they really feed off each other, don't they? Either panic or, oh, I guess she's okay. And when Raven walked by with his band, there were other bands of horses on this stunningly beautiful mountaintop. And I think they got the impression that I was okay. I was kind of like just a bush or a rock or something in their environment. The worst thing you can do, of course, is to try to surprise them. The year before, I had been above this same waterhole, hidden because I didn't know anything then, hidden thinking I had to hide from them like they were a mountain lion or some other predatory animal. And of course, a wild horse and your horses are prey species. And so when Raven accepted me, the others said, well, she didn't eat him. Maybe it's okay. And so I was able to record the intimate lives of these animals, and I continue to do this. The place where I've spent most of my time, and all wild horses are native to North America, and there are numerous herds throughout the West. But this particular herd fascinated me because it became personally, I fell in love with them as individuals. All of them are individuals, even though you might see a herd of wild horses running across the plains. Within that group, there are these social units, and I call them bands, family units, whatever you like to call them. But frequently and almost always they have a dominant stallion. Now they may have a subordinate stallion, but almost always there's a dominant stallion, and Raven was one of those very dominant stallions. And when I did a secondary film Beyond Cloud, I did the ultimate guide to horses for the Discovery Channel. And that focused on characteristics of the horses. How can they run so far and so fast? How can they run that fast? And I learned from doing that show a lot about how horses see the world. And most of you know that they have nearly a 360-degree view of field. The only place where they can't really see is the dock of their tail. And so from that aspect, and the fact they are a prey species, and all of your horses have those historic characteristics of their forebears. When they were evolving in North America, they had huge predators. They had dire wolves and saber-toothed cats. And when they began to evolve in North America, they weren't big, they were little, because it was a very forested environment in the northern part of our hemisphere. But when it started cooling down and we got these broad grasslands, then little Hyracotherium, when I grew up, it was called Eohippus, but it's Hyracotherium now. They evolved as well, and their limbs got longer, and eventually they became solid hooved because their environment became these vast grasslands, and their predators were huge and fast as well. And so in order to survive, they became these incredibly fast running machines. And in the Pryor Mountains, where I've spent so much time, they have been predated by mountain lions. And so here they are, prey species. And in this particular environment, mountain lions can be predatory toward foals almost always. Rarely will they attack an adult animal. But in the course of my filming one year, all the foals were killed on the mountain. The only one that survived was a foal that was born at the bottom of the Pryor Wild Horse Range. along a paved highway. So all of those foals died. And although it was tremendously sad, I was also seeing nature at work. I was also seeing a continuum, because the horses started behaving differently. They started being much more alert. And sometimes they would group together. Bands would be in closer proximity to each other. And I found it, while sad, very, very interesting, because they were changing their behavior to try to protect themselves. And so the next year there was full predation, but it was a little less. And in subsequent years, a little less and a little less. And unfortunately, the BLM, who manages wild horses in the West, called in hunters to kill the mountain lions. And so this wonderful natural continuum that was, the horses were really, it was interesting to see how they changed their behavior to protect themselves. That was in an instant destroyed. And so I think that's the saddest, in all my filming years, I think maybe that's the saddest time for me, is that this natural balance had occurred, and yet in an instant it was destroyed. So I don't, do we have the opportunity to answer questions now or not?
We have a couple of minutes. If no, anyone has any questions, of course, they can write them in the chat. How is there a way for us to see the videos? I mean, are they available out in the?
Yes, the cloud programs are available on DVD from the Cloud Foundation. So it's the Cloud Foundation, okay, all one word.org. Those documentaries were highly regarded. In fact, the first Cloud film was voted the most popular film in the whole nature series portfolio. So I was very proud of that. So the 3 films are on one DVD, and I would recommend them if you're interested in being a better horse trainer, being a better equestrian, understanding the behavior of your horses. Then I think that you would really enjoy them. Plus, they're very, very pretty. I mean, Cloud was a beautiful Palomino, and just a stunning animal. And what I've been filming on this trip to the Pryor, since I'm still filming, are his lookalike daughter Encore and his lookalike grandson Echo. And now they have their own families. And so in the documentary series I'm creating now, we follow the offspring of Cloud. And I was just on the mountain with Matoska, Cloud's son, with his 2 little daughters who were born late last year, and they're a kick. And now one little yearling stallion of a band that was nearby came and wanted to play with Valentina, who's the older of the 2 little foals. And it was pretty cute to see, because she was not going to put up with this little guy. And eventually Matoska, her father, came and told the colt to go home, and he did. There's rarely it's just not a physical battle. It's just gestures, and they read each other. They know, I better go home or he's going to get mad at me, and then it could get physical. So the behaviors are just absolutely fascinating and so valuable if you really want to understand how a horse thinks, a natural horse.
Mm-hmm. Are these names you gave them?
Yes.
Okay. Just checking. Yep, they're okay.
And now what we do in the Pryors is we all collaborate. The Pryor Mustang Center that's at the bottom of the mountain, and that's a wonderful center that has all things Pryor Mustangs that you want. If you come to Lovell, Wyoming, they have a center there. And what we do is we collaborate. So when there are new foals born, we collaborate with suggestions of names. And back in 2000, we started with A. So the horses that are born that have A names, you know they were born in 2000. So now we're all the way up to, what are we up to? W this year. There are not any foals yet, but we're all the way up to the W year. So all the babies will be W, so you'll know they're 2022 babies.
Fantastic. And your first film was done when?
I started filming 1995.
It was 95.
It aired in 1999.
Okay.
And then the second show premiered 2 years later. And then Challenge of the Stallions was about 5 years after that. And so I've just kept filming and am working on a multi-hour Netflix type of project, I hope.
Wow.
Netflix or somebody, whoever picks it up, but I'm pretty
Well,
confident that it's unique, so I think it will be picked up.
Yeah. Ginger, thank you so much. Really fascinating, and I hope everybody feels a little like I do. I can't wait to do a little more research. And,
Good.
learn some more. Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you on the trail.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so we move on now to a subject that I've, as I do all of my teaching, and I think it's something that people don't pay enough attention to. And I'm thrilled to be able to have two people on here to help us understand, hopefully, a little bit more about conditioning of the horse and how to take it a little more seriously. So we start with Denny Emerson, who I evented with more than a few years ago, huh, Denny?
Probably 60.
Exactly right. He's the only equestrian to have won both an international gold medal in eventing and a Tevis Cup. He won the Tevis Cup buckle.
I didn't win it. I
got
a buckle.
The buckle, yes. And endurance. For those of you that don't know about the Tevis Cup, it's out in the West, and it's a 100-mile race. Known for his world-class horsemanship, Denny is trained and competed in multiple disciplines, published 3 books, and regularly shares his wisdom on his Facebook page, which has over 100,000 followers. I highly recommend it. He's been inducted into 3 halls of fame: the U.S. Eventing Association Hall of Fame, the Vermont Academy Athletic Hall of Fame, and the Dartmouth College Athletic Hall of Fame. In the year 2000, he was named one of the most 50 influential horsemen of the 20th century by the Chronicle of the Horse. And we could go on and on and on about all the wonderful things that Denny has done. And joining him is someone that worked with me when she was in college, and that wasn't quite as long ago. Lauren Sprieser, a well-known FEI dressage rider. She's produced many FEI horses all the way to Grand Prix, as well as helping her students to do so. She competed 3 times at the North American Young Rider Championships, winning medals, I think, every year or almost every year. Lauren's worked with many of our top international trainers and is a regular contributor to the Chronicle of the Horse. If you haven't read her blog and you don't pay attention to it, I highly recommend that, on the Chronicle of the Horse. And she's now getting into all kinds of other things. She's a very, very busy woman. But, and before I forget, we're going to post in the chat, Trafalgar Square Horse and Rider Books offers a 25% discount to those that participate in Dressage4Kids activities. So that's where you can get Denny's books. So I'm going to post that information in the chat. So Denny, tell us a little bit about, well, I don't think I need to ask you specific questions. Tell us a little bit your thoughts on conditioning. I know you're not a dressage rider, which most of us are beyond being an event rider, but you do know a lot about bringing the horse along, conditioning, and I'd be fascinated to know a little bit the difference between the conditioning of a Tevis Cup 100-mile race up in the mountains and a more basic dressage type horse.
Well, one of the things, am I visible on this screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that I thought about, because you see people doing all the time, they'll take a horse that isn't very fit and they'll go do a lot with it. You know, they'll go for a quote joyride, and they're the only ones having joy. The horse is panting and sweating and gasping for breath. And so one of the things I thought about was, you know, it's easy for a person to not know what's going on underneath them. And so I thought to myself, okay, let's say that we randomly went down a town street and picked 50 people just randomly off the street and took them down to the local high school gym or track and field and made them start running and lifting weights. And what you would see, you know, you might by accident get a couple of really good athletes, some high school or college athletes or some marathon runners, but the chances are you'd have a bunch of unfit business people and, you know, parents and, you know, whatever. And you'd see people in huge distress almost immediately, don't you think? I mean, it seems to me, you know, you'd want an ambulance there, literally, you would. So, so then I thought, okay, if we were to do with our horse what we would have to do with ourselves to get fit enough to withstand that kind of work, we would start with wherever we were. And if you were a 17-year-old track and field athlete, you're already sort of there. But if you're a 57-year-old, you know, couch potato, that's starting from a very different place. So I think the first thing you have to figure out is, where are you starting from? You know, is this a horse that has been in steady work? Is it a horse that, you know, is reasonably in a good weight, has musculature? And then you just take off from there. And I think that I'd be very interested. I'm going to be really interested in hearing what Lauren has to say about how you get a horse fit for the collected work and engagement and, you know, the sort of sit and lift, because I think that the different kinds of things we do with horses test all sorts of different systems that a horse has. And, you know, if you think about the systems, you start with, you know, bones, tendons, ligaments, muscles, respiratory, cardio, all of these things have to be gotten fit, but some things have to be gotten fitter. For galloping, you don't have to have pulling strength the way a draft horse or a carriage horse might. You don't have to have lifting strength the way a upper level dressage horse has. You don't have to have climbing the mountain strength the way an endurance horse has. You've got to have galloping fitness, you know, and so that's one type of fitness. And so whatever it is that you're doing, you need to sort of, you start with basic fitness, walking them to get them base fit, and then trotting. And you know how they talk about before you do long slow distance precedes short fast distance, LSD, and you start with a horse that's unfit in the spring and you start walking them, and then for maybe 45 minutes a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and then you get up to an hour, and then you get up to an hour and a quarter, and then you add a little bit of trotting. And then, you know, as the weeks turn into months, you can begin to ask more and more. And so I think that the big difference between distance riding and eventing, when I did it, when you and I did it, and you know, when your sister was chef de keep at the 3-day team, where it was long format, like at Burley, we had a 17 or 18 mile day that second day, you know, with 5 minutes of steeplechase at 690 meters a minute. So we had to do a lot of galloping. But before you do the gallopings, you don't bow their tendon or, you know, get suspensory or ligament tears. You have to put in all that long base stuff. So I think that, you know, the endurance horses, the Tevis Cup horses, the 100-mile trail ride horses, they don't have to do so much galloping, but they have to do a ton of hill climbing, trotting up hills, you know, getting up off their back, bung, 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 push, push, lift, lift, which isn't the same as what Piaffe or Passage asks for, or collected work, but it's a certain degree of putting the hocks under and compressing and lifting. So I think that, you know, basically you have to figure out, what am I going to do with this horse? What are the requirements of this particular activity? And then build in those abilities so that you're not stressing the horse. And another thing that your sister drilled into me and Jack Legoff, always listen to the horse, you know, don't just go out blindly galloping along. You know, you can tell if you drop the reins and back off for a little bit, if that horse slows down, you know, you're getting a little bit close to the bottom there. So you maybe back off and give them a break and then come on again. You don't just put your foot on the gas pedal and just keep going. So anyway, those are just some quick, sort of a quick overview. Figure out what it is you need to do, and then figure out whether your horse has the ability to do it without getting in trouble.
Super.
And Lauren, I'd be really interested in how you take a horse that is not a sit down, lift up horse, or maybe is bred to be, but hasn't had that kind of work, and how you systematically over time create that ability to carry itself with greater engagement.
Lauren, I would love for you, because Lauren spoke to my winter program, so I know a little bit about what she's going to talk about, but before you talk about what you learned this year, just talk a little bit about what you think about the development of the Grand Prix horse, how fitness is part of that. Am I making sense? I can't hear you, Lauren. You need to unmute.
Rude.
Yeah.
Okay, hello. That makes perfect sense. So I grew up riding wing nuts. I pretty much exclusively rode nutcases through my young rider years and my U25 years. And so for those animals, fitness, well, certainly very important, because that's unfit horses get hurt. You know, the energy that they brought to the work came from God. It came from being sort of blood type horses that had a lot of energy from nature. And so for me, I had never really thought about horse fitness as a subject worthy of extensive study, even after I was a few Grand Prix horses in, because I simply hadn't had to. And certainly in my own program, in my own development of my young horses, well, certainly I like winning things. Who doesn't? I have never personally gotten terribly invested in any of the young horse classes or the, you know, first level USDF finals. And so I had never really minded, I had never spent any particular effort on my younger and developing horses thinking about fitness as a construct, because I just didn't care all that much. I found that the amount of work that I was bringing, that they were bringing to the table in their basic training was sufficient to do the level of work at shows that I cared about when they were young and developing horses. And then by the time they got to Grand Prix horses, they had many, many years of that really correct development. You know, Denny's long, slow distances, I think probably also applies to, it's certainly in the warm blood horse, 5 through 8. I know that there are people out there making 7 and 8 year old Grand Prix horses. I don't know how, and I'm okay with that, because my horses were not Grand Prix horses at 8. They were also still sound horses late in their teenage years. And so maybe somebody else could have been doing it better, but at least I was doing it in a way that didn't cause my horses injury and let them have productive, energetic years into their teens. Lennon, does that kind of answer your question?
Yes. So tell us a little bit about what you learned this year.
So to get to this,
sorry to interrupt you. Do you have any photos of your horse?
I'm sure that I do. I'm not sure I know how to share them.
You talk, I'll see what I can do.
Okay. So let me introduce Elvis. Guernsey Elvis came to me in the fall of his 7-year-old year. He's a Dutch horse, although he's sort of an unusually bred Dutch horse. He's mostly show jumper and thoroughbred, actually, which is sort of interesting. When he came to me, he was doing all the Prix St. George things in sort of a young horse class, wide open kind of way. And I did the developing Prix St. George, and then I did CDI small tour, and I was starting to put the pieces of the Grand Prix together. But I had found in my showing him in the international small tour that he just fatigued, not cardiovascularly. He was never struggling to breathe. He sweat great. His body condition looked good. He's a relatively easy keeper, but feeding him more didn't seem to make a difference. It just felt like his muscles would burn out, particularly in the carrying exercises, in a lot of collected canter, and particularly for him in the Piaffe. And I did a few shows about 12 months ago at Inter 2. They went fine, but he was just dying on me. And I said, I'm going to make a study of this. I'm going to start paying attention to fitness. And the first thing I did, I live outside of Middleburg, Virginia. I called 2 of my team level eventer friends and students, and I said, what should I be doing? And they said, trot and canter sets, Lauren, and some jumping and some cavaletti, but mostly trot and canter sets. And I said, okay, obviously they know what they're doing and I don't, but the average, event horse in peak fitness is a much lighter build, a much slighter build, a much smaller poundage than even a pretty lean dressage horse. Dressage horses carry a lot of top line muscle. They're heavy. And it just made me nervous. And so I made a phone call to one of Denny's teammates, my wonderful friend, Jimmy Wofford. And I said, Mr. Wofford, what am I doing? He said, don't you dare do a trot set on your horse. Don't you dare do a gallop set on your horse. You are going to do pick and shovel work. You are going to walk and you are going to walk and you're going to walk until you are blue in the face. Then you're going to walk some more. And I said, okay. And I set out a schedule. So pull out your notebooks, class. Here's my schedule. Elvis I started riding with a wristwatch. That was the first thing I did, actually, before I spoke to any event riders. I started riding with the watch. When you're building up young horses, when you're teaching them things, piaffing is hard. You don't do it forever. You get a few good steps and you pat your horse, and there are days when that's your entire ride. When you're teaching flying changes, the same thing, the technique exercises. You don't just go and go and go. And so I started timing my rides, and I was blown away by how short they were, because I was coming from this sort of young and developing horse perspective of once you get the exercise, don't keep going. So the first thing I did was I started riding for 45 minutes, whether that was 45 minutes of like kick on Grand Prix work or 45 minutes of stretching when I had time to kill, when I had achieved everything in a capital D dressage sense that I wanted to achieve. I did some stretching. I did some trot canter transitions. I put his neck down, I picked his neck up. And that certainly improved things. I was blown away by how much that improved things, but it wasn't enough. And so after speaking to Mr. Wofford, I then went to, in addition to 5 days a week of 45 minutes, plus I hacked my horses on the 6th day and give them a 7th day off. So 5 days of 45 minutes of work. I started with 3 days a week of 30 minutes. Then I went to 3 days a week of 40 minutes of just walking, snaffle bridle, not on the contact. Now I'm more on the contact, but in the beginning, not really on a contact, just kind of tootling around. So 3 days of 30 minutes, then 3 days of 40 minutes, then 4 days of 30 minutes, then 4 days of 40 minutes, then 4 days of 50 minutes, then 5 days of 40 minutes, up until I got to 5 days of 50 minutes, which is as fit as I've gotten him. That was not a linear progression. That took obviously weeks just to get through that. Plus, at the time I was horse showing, so that path was interrupted. When I was showing, I would do no walking. In the beginning, it was awful. In the beginning, there were days where I would get on to do my 45 minutes of work, and he would look at me like, "Are you out of your mind? I'm going to keel over." And on those days, maybe my 45 minutes of work was also just walking or some simple walk trot canter transitions. I listened to my horse. I made sure that he was never powering around in a big gait in his work unless he felt really good in his body, because horses do soft tissue injuries when their limbs extend beyond what their musculature can support. And so on the days when his muscles were really tired from the additional walking, we tootled around in a nice little boring gait for a 6. By the end of that, I had a tiger in the tank. There was a period of time, this second round of fitness work, I got him fit, I let him have some downtime, and then I got him fit again. And in February, Elvis was squealing every time I put my leg on, which was exciting. let me tell you. But the phenomenal difference it made, it really took him from a horse that could endure an inch or two to a horse that I just did my first big hairy Grand Prix special on an 85-degree day at 100% humidity at the White Fences Showgrounds, which is within hacking distance of my farm. After the Grand Prix special, which is a 7.5-minute test, by the way, if you've never suffered through it, he dragged me home. He dragged me home the 15-minute walk between the showgrounds and my farm. And I said, okay, I'm on to something now. So my plan from here is to get up to an hour and then see if I get bucked off.
I am trying to figure out how to share the photos. Did I just put something up there?
Yes, you did. If you click on the picture, that picture, yep, the one that your mouse was just on, see if you can make that big.
There.
There you go.
Is that showing like it should, Lauren?
Yep. If
No,
you scroll down just a bit so you can better see the bottom picture.
I don't know how I can do that.
Okay. Everybody can figure it out. There you go.
There. Okay. So explain what we're looking at.
I try and take confirmation shots of my horses on a regular basis because I think it's really fun to see them develop in general. But at the bottom is October of 2020 when I hadn't done any of the walking yet.
And
August,
what level, Lauren, he was showing at what level?
We were doing the small tour, so St. George and Inner One.
Yeah.
And then that August 2021 picture, the top picture, he actually isn't even in peak fitness yet. I think at that point, I'm guessing that picture was right before the National Developing Horse Championships, which is at the Inter 2 level. And I think we were maybe up to 4 days, 50 minutes. I don't think I'd even gotten to 5 days yet.
And Lauren, you said you do it for a long time. You were doing it on a loose rein, and you were tell me if I'm correct. You were going in Virginia. You have lovely hills.
I do. I have 85 beautiful rolling acres in Virginia.
So going up and down hills.
Yes.
And would you say it's the kind of walk I see my kids come in the ring where they're somewhat catatonic? Or were you really making him walk?
I call it the going home to dinner walk.
Yeah.
A walk with inspiration and purpose. I will say, so obviously I'm here in Wellington now. There are no hills in Wellington. So I've started actually walking him a little bit more on the aids just to try and sort of compensate for the lack of topographic change. I don't really know if it's making a difference. He feels great. I will tell you that I also use an equiband, which is the saddle pad with the rubber bands, the exercise bands that go sort of around the bum and under the belly. I haven't tried doing it without, so I don't know if they're making a difference, but they're certainly not hurting.
Lauren, this is Denny. I just want to add something to this.
Sure.
In 1974, Jack Legoff, when Marshall Lendon's
my sister
was basically the chef to keep for the team. We would do our flat work in the morning or maybe gymnastic jumping, and then Jack would send us out for these 1.5 to 2 hour walks. And it's really hard on the ride. And they were supposed to be, that's what he called them, get home in time for supper walks, where the horse had to march. And he would have you comb the reins. Remember that combing the reins thing where the horse would drop his head and lift his back and really march. And I can remember, and it's very hard on the rider. I mean, because when you are walking, you don't shift around. And so 2 little things I remember. Bruce Davidson, his butt was so sore. We had, in the place where we had supper, there was a fireplace with a mantle, and Bruce would put his dish on the mantle and eat standing up. And Tad Coffin, the next cycle, he got so bad he was wearing Pampers, right? So after he won the gold medal, I said, so Tad, all these other gold medalists, they're getting sponsored by various companies. Why don't you see if you could get sponsored by Pampers? And you could have a picture of a little baby on one side and you with your gold medal on the other. What did Tad Coffin and baby Charlie have in common? Pampers. I didn't think it was funny. But that walking is magic. You know?
It was so magical for this horse, and I have since put another horse on what we call the Jimmy Wofford walking tour. And not only has it been staggering for their body condition and staggering for their carrying capacity, for their muscular capacity, but it also has really improved the energy that they bring into the arena and the energy they bring into their work every day. It's made two pretty quiet horses quite hot in a lovely sort of way. But it's really been a joy to show both of these horses at Grand Prix. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention, that risk versus reward. If you're going to do a suspensory at the walk, you're going to have to try really, really hard. You're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to do something incredibly stupid. Whereas it's pretty easy to hurt your horse at trot, at canter, at gallop.
Yep.
You know, there's just, it was so much safer of a path forward. And I'm so glad that Mr. Wofford sorted me out.
Lauren, we've got, just to clarify, because we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
When you're doing this walking, how does that work in with your regular work? Are you doing your regular work, 45 minutes, and then the walking?
It depended on the day. It depended on what I had time for. It depended on the weather. Because certainly if it was pouring, if it was going to pour rain in the afternoons, I would either send myself or one of the working students out in the morning, and then I'd work him in the afternoon. Sometimes here in Florida, I have the opportunity to ride with my coach, who can only come in the afternoon. So there are days that if you see a little brown horse wandering around white fences in the morning, it's me. So
I mean, you do one part of the morning or afternoon, you do your regular schooling, and then the other half of the day you do your, so you're doing both is the question is.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly when you're just getting started and you're only doing it 3 days a week, you know, there are days where you only ride dressage with them. But yes, it is in addition to my 5-day-a-week program, not in place of.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Is it wrong to do all that walking on a walker or a treadmill?
I actually started Elvis on the walker because I have one. The other horse in my life with whom I have done this did not start on the walker. I'm really not sure it made a difference. I do think for sure that carrying the weight of a rider is not nothing. And even, you know, 1,600 pounds of horse and a 100-pound girl, which I am not, by the way, you know, it's still a factor. And I think that the horse has to have a strong top line to carry a rider in a way that he can just kind of dog it around an exerciser. I don't have a treadmill. I am my treadmill. So I don't really have an opinion on the treadmill. I can tell you that water treadmills are amazing. I've had the pleasure of using one, but I don't have $110,000 to buy one. So that's that.
Denny, when you were eventing, did you use interval training as part of your training, fitness training?
Yeah, for the jumping. I mean, for the gallop days.
Yeah.
And a typical, you know, we would gallop about every 4th, or sometimes you'd start with every 5th day. And you might start out with, Jack always had to start out with 3 5-minute trots. With 2-minute rest intervals. So you'd trot 5, rest 2, walk 2, trot 5, walk 2, trot 5, walk 2, canter 4 at like 400 meters a minute, walk 2, canter 4 minutes, 400 meters a minute, walk home. And then your next one, you might add, the 3 trot sets stayed the same, always 3 5-minute trots. You walked somewhere for 15 or 20 minutes to give them their initial loosening. And then you did your 3 trots, and then you would begin to expand the minutes of the interval of the canter set. So instead of 4 minutes, you might go 4, 4, 4, and then you might go 4, 4, 5, or 5, 4, 4, and then you go 5, 5, 4, and then you go 5, 5, 5. And just before Burley, which was that 17, 18 mile across country day, we were up to like 6 minutes. And at the end of the 4th or 5th minute, would be at the bottom of this big hill, and then you just come pelting up the hill at about 650, 700 meters a minute, to really get them, sucking for air. So it was a very gradual evolution. And I never worked my big time distance horses, with that much speed stress. I would put in many longer hours, but not as fast. And maybe it would be better. I mean, I don't know what like the real professional endurance people do, whether they add more galloping and have faster work, which I think might not be a bad thing to do if the horse doesn't break down. You got to be so careful.
And I think to relate this to the dressage world, and this is my personal thought, I'd be interested if you all agree or disagree. When we're schooling them, I see so often people that just go and go and go and go, and that's when you're likely to get your suspensory wearing the ligaments out. And taking that interval training, which I grew up with eventing, thanks to Jack, into our dressage work of working and then the short break, and working and then the short break, and working in the short break. And to me, that's very, very important in maintaining your horse's soundness as well as developing his fitness, is the interval training. It's the short sets with a little recovery moment that I think more people could take into their dressage work.
It's interval training in the walk is sort of a non-issue, but I can tell you that I'm an athlete. I ran triathlons for years, and that interval training was huge. And as of late, as I mentioned, the Grand Prix special is very long and very tedious. And I found that I was getting a little tired last year, and I wear a heart rate monitor when I exercise, and I started thinking about doing more interval training myself, and my resting heart rate has dropped quite a lot, as well as my recovery time from my heart rate being high. It comes down much faster now, having spent more time thinking about it. So it must be true for horses too.
And since we're talking about conditioning, thank you for mentioning the fact that the rider also needs to be fit.
Yes.
Any thoughts from either of you? Our question here is, do you have any suggestions for modifying your twice daily fitness program for someone who is only able to get to the stable once a day?
Working students.
Well,
I'm deadly serious.
Not everybody's lucky enough to have a working student either.
No, but certainly, particularly if you have a dependable animal. I'm in Florida, I'm actually a lot less employed than I am in Virginia. In Florida, I have time to do the work myself, but in Virginia, I absolutely do not. And so I have sent my working students, again, I'm a pro, I have those. But fortunately, Elvis is very polite, and Helio is even more polite. And so they tend to be good eggs to take out hacking. My working students have gotten very good at listening to podcasts. It's a very nice walk on a nice horse. You do have to think about, giddy up, but that's not that hard to do on a Grand Prix horse, generally speaking. And you get to listen to good things, and you can find people out there who want some saddle time. If your horse is dependable and not a wingnet, and you have space to do it, see if one of your barn buddies wants to go out for a hack in the afternoon. See if the kid who cleans the stalls wants a little saddle time. If the nice thing about it being so productive without the horse having to be really on the aids is that you aren't going to have to deal with somebody who's less experienced touching your horse's mouth.
Lauren, do you think if there are those that have their horse in the backyard and they have to work for a living and so forth. If you were in that situation, would you, and you can only ride your horse once a day, would you add some walk after you rode, after you schooled? Would you maybe do one day of just walk? Do you have a sense of what you might do? And Denny, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the reality for people in 2022 is very different from when I was a kid. When I was a kid, in Greenfield, Massachusetts. I lived on the Stone Lake Prospect Hill School campus. I could ride out the back of the campus and turn onto Swamp Road and ride all the way to Vermont. That's how I got ready I rode my first 100-mile trail ride. When I was just turned 15, 1956. And, you know, I didn't know anything about it, except I just rode a lot because you had open countryside. But today, you know, the same kid living on that campus would have Interstate 91 on the back, Route 2 on one side, Route 5 on the other side, and a housing development at the other edge. So, you know, and I think your average American today tends to live in a suburb, work in the town, and then board their horse somewhere out, you know, where if they have 10 acres, that's considered a ranch. And you just don't have the place to go out and do endless hacking, you know, the way, you know, theoretically you'd love to do. So I think that what you can do is you can break it up. I went to that Klaus Balkenhol clinic at UMass. I don't know if you went to that one, where he talked about never, ever, ever fail to give your horse at least 10 minutes of walking when you first get on. Do not get on your horse, walk around for 3 minutes and pick up the trot. He said, give him at least, and use your watch, give him at least 10 minutes to let everything sort of loosen up. And so I think you need to do that. So there's walking. And then you can think of sets in, you know, Lauren, you're an endurance rider and athlete. You probably did weightlifting. If you think about weight, I was on the wrestling team at Dartmouth and Andover, and, you know, we used to work out in the weight room, and you didn't just drill. You do sets of reps. You know, you might do 8 curls, and then you would walk around a little bit and shake it off. And then you'd come back and try to do 8 more. Maybe you could do 7, and then you'd do 1 more set. Maybe you could do 6. So, you know, that's a little bit like when you're putting a horse on the aids and, you know, riding some circles. That's like a set of reps, and then do that, and then go for a walk. And, you know, on the space that you do have, if you're stuck on a small place and can only ride once. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there as I'd be interested to hear what others might think.
I think that you can get creative for sure, but also, you know, if you're only able to ride your horse once a day, but you work regularly with a coach, maybe there's a way to stagger from time to time your coach having a schooling ride, which is a productive use of your time and your coach's time and your money, because everybody benefits from their coach sitting on their horse from time to time. And then you do the walking in the afternoon on that day. I think that you're going to have to get creative and think outside of the box, maybe a combination of those things, a combination of 1 day a week being a little bit of a longer ride, like Denny says, where you think about incorporating more walk sets into your actual work, 1 day where your coach rides and you do the walking, and 1 day where you ride and you find a scrappy 15-year-old kid who wants some saddle time in your neighborhood. There's ways to do it.
Patty, one of our veterinarians, who's very helpful to Dressage4Kids, commented, I think very importantly, the variation of loading well, just riding on different surfaces. And I think this is something that it's kind of gotten scary. I'm here with 13 kids this winter, and the number of them that can't just go out and ride down the road because they're out of the ring and terrified. But so first of all, getting out of the ring, and then making sure your horse is working on some hard ground, some uneven ground, of course, the hills, and this sense now that we always have to ride on perfect footing. And that's probably why we have so many suspensory injuries. What do you think, Denny?
Well, I think, you know, when you're doing distance riding, you ride a lot. You know, you ride probably, I mean, I think some of the big time endurance riders will ride 3 days a week, and they'll do a long, slow ride 1 day, and then they'll give a horse a day off, and then they'll do, you know, maybe a 10-mile day faster, and then they'll give a horse 2 days off, and then they'll do like maybe a 12-mile day with some cantering in there, you know, and they're only doing like 3 days a week, but their horse is getting a lot of stress on those days with rest days to recover. And then there are other people that say, no, you can work your horse 5 or 6 days a week, 1 day off, you know, so that you're adding more miles, but some days are are slower, so you're out for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours even. The horse has to get used to carrying all that weight, and you're climbing, you're just going wherever you have to go. You know, you're going up and down hills, you're going through stumpy, rooty parts of it. The horse has to squat down, you know, to come down those steep hills. I mean, it's, you know, big time distance riding takes a lot of time to get fit for. I mean, the Tevis Cup, the year when I tried it twice, the first year, 2003, I get about halfway around and get a stone bruise and pulled. And then the second year I finished, it was the 50th anniversary. So they had 250 horses and I finished 75th. And I rode, I was on his back 21 hours. We had 2 1-hour breaks, 2 1-hour holds. That's a lot of damn riding, you know, and it's so steep and so rocky and so, you know, you're trotting down those endless hills, and downhill trotting is hard on them. And they just have to be rock hard fit. And I think it takes you 4 or 5 years to get a horse 100-mile fit. You know, it's not a month's thing, it's years.
We have a question. Oh, is that me? Making weird noise, sorry. We have a question about what about in the winter when you can't get out of your indoor arena? Let me just tell you, Denny was talking about the walking, and of course, he's talking about back in those days, some of you don't even know what the full 3-day event was with the endurance, where you had roads and tracks, then steeplechase, then another roads and tracks, and then you had the cross-country course. So the horses had to be much fitter and fitter in a different way than they are nowadays. So after a 3-day event, the horses had a period of weeks off entirely to completely recover. And Denny mentioned my sister, who worked for Jack Legoff for quite a few years. She took ill, and I filled in when they first thought she was going to get better quickly. And I was lucky enough, I was the only one there basically to ride and to do the first work after the horses had had these weeks off. And it was worked up to an hour a day walking. And there were days, not because of rain, but because of bugs there in Massachusetts, that I ended up with some of the horses having to walk an hour. I had 6 horses to do it on, 6 horses, an hour in the indoor arena. And you talk about getting bored. But it can be done. It's not much fun, but it can be done.
I will also say that walking in the snow is amazing because it's good resistance training, and it ices your horse's legs as you go. And if you fall off, you are cushioned. Not that I would know. I would not know.
We have one more question. What is the evolution? I haven't read it through, so I'm just going to read it. What was the evolution of muscle soreness for your horses as you progress through the walk intervals? Did you do anything differently to help them recover externally or nutritionally? In other words, did you ice them or whatever, or different feeding? Did you find they got sore in the beginning?
Is this question for me?
This is for you, Lauren, about the walking.
You know, Elvis mercifully has a back like a tank. And so I did not feel like he got overwhelmingly, you know, critically debilitatingly sore. And I have always been an ice person in general. So that wasn't doing anything differently. Nutritionally, I'm glad that you guys got that somebody brought this up, because that was also a huge part. Less so for the little Lusitano, but for Elvis, who's a relatively easy keeper. But when I added in that walking, I had to up his food for sure. My horses in Virginia are out 12 hours a day, so he gets plenty of grass. We have incredible grass, but I did have to add in a little bit more grain, and I really had to be mindful of the amino acids that he got. And I ended up using 2 products that I love. One is a daily amino acid blend from Euclid Equine Nutrition, called Muscle EQ. It's great. The amazing product is a branch chain amino acid product. And I tried a couple different ones. The best one I found was a company called BC2A. And there is an important timing component to the administration of branch chain amino acids for energy, less for the soreness issue, but for the processing of lactic acid, there is actually a timing that you want to be feeding these a half an hour before your horse exerts himself. And it made an amazing difference in Elvis's recovery time. I saved the BC2A for shows because it is not inexpensive. But the Muscle EQ product has been phenomenal, and it for sure helped with that lactic acid production. I did feel like he was less sore and more energetic over time.
And Mary, can you put in the chat those two products? Because
I will also mention them on my own social media channels. BC2A is now a sponsor because I was so impressed with the product that I went to them. And so if you want to try it, I have a coupon code that I'm happy. I know. I don't want to hijack the conversation, but no. I can put it on my own social media channels.
And okay, since we're on the subject, what are your social media channels?
I am at Lauren Sprieser everywhere, Facebook, Instagram.
And I do also want to mention, since we're advertising, very highly recommend Denny Emerson's books. Tell me if I say any of these wrong, Denny. How Good Riders Get Good, Know Better to Do Better, and then you have a new one, Begin and Begin Again. Is that right?
Yep.
And I can't recommend them more highly. They're very readable, very interesting. He writes well, they're fun. So we have now gone past our little time. I thank you, Denny, very much. And Lauren, this has been fascinating. And I hope it's given all of you that do ride and teach and train something to think about, whether you're going to take on a whole new program, but at least be thinking carefully about how you are schooling your horses, the time you're spending in the saddle. Is it not just to get their head in the right place and their left hind leg in the right place, but are you building muscle, letting them recover after a hard workout, etc. So thank you, everybody. This has been terrific.
Thank you, Lyndon.
You're very welcome.
Are we?
We are done. We are done. I'm about to hit the end.
Thanks, Lyndon.
Thank you.